In this video I thought to examine how we shroud men's existence in servitude to women. How there's a process I call relativization of manhood, a basing of manhood on womanhood, where manhood is distilled to what suits the females. You see, our societal conception of manhood rests to a deranged extent on what it offers women. I firmly believe that men and women do not originally complete each other. Men are made to complete women. Men are born as non-entities with no inherent value because they are biologically disposable. To endow them with value, the women have to find a use for them. The measuring stick for the value of men wholly rests on what women desire. Due to women's capability to give birth and the caretaker role which arises from that, men are demanded to do everything else the women needs as part of their sex role, which came to define men's lived experiences, or in other words their masculinity, and hence masculinity gets naturally intertwined with utility to females. If the provisioning and protection is valuable to the female, then the men who exudes high levels of virility are high-value males, and if she values supportive caretakers, then the effeminate men are the high-value males in this case. As such, I dare say, the alpha-beta dichotomy is a meaningless schism that tricks you into thinking servitude to women as an alpha man is superior opposite to servitude to women as a beta man. This dichotomy is nothing but a man up and become a real men gynocentric indoctrination in monosphere lingo. Alpha and beta men are both functionally the same. They both derive identity and purpose from being a utility to females. They both find solace in their usury for the fear of abandonment of not having a woman, or the scorn for eschewing women. The elation and the glee and pride these alpha men feel at some busted hoe batting an eye at them shows you that alpha men are just successful simps at dating. Men exist solely as utilitarian objects to the female. That's the cold-hearted truth. Men compete against each other to prove themselves to their potential suitors. In this sexual competition, they display as much willingness to prioritize the female and serenade their endless love songs of servile servitude to the women to showcase their viability and utility, and whoever ends up with the most use value for the potential suitor gets picked. As Briffault's law states, where there's no benefit to be obtained for the female, no association with the male occurs. The fact that we are wired biologically to seek to fulfill our evolutionary imperative of reproduction just further fuels this socialization. The traditional patriarchal system utilized this understanding and created a system with checks and balances on both sexes to structure society productively, although it let women off the hook more often than men, and was exceptionally easy on them. It defined a rigid concept of manhood and womanhood and placed restrictions on men and women in order to standardize their sex roles to facilitate family formation. Everybody knew how to navigate the relationship and get a family going. Then the matriarchy began taking hold in early 18th century. Women tore apart all restrictions placed on them, leaving the restrictions placed on men and even strengthening them. You see, matriarchy still has patriarchal elements because they benefit women. There are two prominent ways I identified for relativization of manhood. The first is mainstream media indoctrination and the second is sexual deprivation. Let's talk about the media first. The matriarchal order propagates itself through the gynocentric propaganda it blurts in media. The media works tirelessly to indoctrinate men into being cogs in the United States of the matriarchy. From youth we are bombarded with messages about women's bodies, feelings, needs, and desires. The objective of this is to make men attuned to women's needs. We also see a deluge of traditional portrayals of dating and mating even in these feminist times. This is done to prime men to be a utility, an ad machine for the female. Here I present you pertinent findings on indoctrination of your average Joe that I quote from Wikipedia. In their 2022 study, Charer and Warren examined the endorsement of traditionally masculine values in regard to gender norms among combined viewers of streaming services such as Netflix, video games, and YouTube. Traditionally masculine traits in this society included emotional detachment, dominance, toughness, and/or avoidance of femininity among boys and girls in the sample. Results showed that participants in the heavy viewer category indicated higher scores of endorsement of traditionally masculine traits for men compared to light viewers. End of quote. By emotional detachment, the matriarchy primes men to not take abuse seriously. Even as the feminists tell you to show emotions, they also instruct you to not burden the women in your life, and not to mention how they seem to express hate and derision towards men's rights activism. The dominance and toughness are doublespeak, as you possess no authority in the family because of Violence Against Women Act, sexual assault shield laws, believe all women, and so on. There's also another finding I quote from Wikipedia. Viewers who consume more television usually also have more traditional views of women. End of quote. Obviously, endorsing these traditional roles is literally endorsing slavery. You want to give us traditional roles, give us traditional laws and benefits. In current times, women enjoy all the modern benefits the matriarchy brings. Nothing about them is traditional. Research has also shown that women are more likely to be portrayed as victims on television than men. This in effect essentializes an inherent evil in men to undercut any support networks they may get, and in the same vein cement the idea that women are oppressed and abused by men to justify further expansion of the privileges and powers women hold. Quoting again from Wikipedia, men were also portrayed as more dominant than women, and although men were more often objectified, women were consistently portrayed as hyper-feminized and hypersexualized. End of quote. So, they portray men as traditional breadwinners who slave away their lives, and eventually they are rewarded a faithful feminine 1950s wife, which is nothing but a fantasy. Anybody who was sold on this fantasy soon experienced buyer's remorse, as the advertised product is nothing like what they got. Men are also portrayed as lascivious and women-obsessed, and always on the lookout for an opportunity to shag with an ingrate poon-wielding individual, and as lost and depressed individuals when they don't have a woman in their lives. This stereotypes men who do not portray a lascivious, women-obsessed personality as having a defect in their masculinity that needs fixing. And don't fall for the claptrap the feminists blurt that it's a sign of patriarchy. It's evident that it's a sign of matriarchal rule, because in patriarchal times, sex outside marriage was considered immoral, and virginity was a sign of virtue. After the Romance era, where matriarchy began taking hold, all these views began evaporating. We ended up with sex-positive movements spearheaded by feminists in their quest to dismantle the remains of patriarchal elements that restricted women and bolster the matriarchy. The second way of upholding the matriarchy is sexual deprivation of men. We have preponderance of sexual imagery even though prostitution is illegal, and heralding of being lascivious as being in the fraternity of manhood, even as wanting a woman for sex is considered objectification by the left and immoral by the tredcons. The gynocentric order controls men by making sexual imagery as common as possible and actual sex as scarce as possible. This constant state of sexual arousal plants an insatiable need for sex in men. To attain sexual relief, they find themselves in a situation where they have to negotiate with the devil and commit in a relationship with all its lopsided balances of power. After all of this brainwashing and manipulation, men's identity gets wrapped into his servitude to the women, to the point insulting women is like insulting the men themselves. When you take a jibe at this fictitious vision of happy ever after with an equally lascivious wife from the 1950s, who is literally a carbon copy of every single wife in other fantasies, these men recoil in disgust and malign you. By the way, did you know only 8% of women have a hourglass figure? She's a square. My objective as a MGTOW for making this channel is not to dismantle the matriarchy as much as purge this fantasy men have about being servile to women, a fantasy they find blissful, such that they no longer compromise their lives and the lives of their brothers to pursue it. I want you to know that manhood or masculinity is traits and propensities you possess. Another more straightforward definition for it is your lived experiences. There isn't one masculinity and everybody should adhere to it, obviously. There are masculinities and yours is just as valid as any other. You see, these fucked up gender ideologues present masculinity as one-dimensional because they only think in monisms to aid their agenda. They want to paintbrush men as oppressors and aggressors, and they can't easily do that if they acknowledge the existence of plurality of masculinities. I urge men to purge gynocentric brainwashing and programming and stop intertwining their value with their likability to women. Your lived experiences, your masculinity is not about bitches. It's not about dying by the creed women and children first. It's not about taking in your arms a busted, ingrate bitch to prove your value. Your masculinity is your masculinity, the same way your life is your life. Do with it whatever you will. If you are convinced of our message, then you are in the fraternity of the avant-garde of men who are redefining masculinity on their own terms, free of coercion and manipulation. That's all I got to say. I got more videos that are still in the works, and it won't be a long wait.